What's up, A-pushers? Mr. P here. We're going to do a little lecture on the European theater, World War II, all right? Hopefully all of you have got your trusty handy books with you over this break so you can review some of these chapters. They'll give you a little bit more detail and depth. Here we are looking out on this image here. This is Omaha Beach, and these are American soldiers getting off the duck boats and landing at the beaches of Normandy. A massive turning point in World War II in the European theater. But before we do that, let's go over some things. A little background here, all right? First off, post-World War I, the Treaty of Versailles. Did not make a lot of people happy. Basically, the victors were pretty happy about it, but the Germans were not. The Japanese government was not happy about it and how it disrespected a lot of other nations that were non-European. And as you know, past the 20s, the world goes into a depression. The Germans are under this new government called the Weimar Republic, and they deal with a hyperinflation that is just out of control. It was said it was cheaper to wallpaper your walls with paper money than actually buy paper. People would go to the store with baskets of paper money to buy a loaf of bread. It was out of control. And when you have a political system that's out of control like this allows certain types of maybe extremist groups to come to power. And what the Nazis do to get power is done democratically. They don't act democratic once they're in power. But what they do it democratically and eventually take over the Reichstag, which is the Congress in Berlin. All right. Anyways, moving on. And in the 1920s and 30s, the United States become much more isolationist. Remember, Wilson's plan and dream of a League of Nations really falls apart. All right, he's not able to sell to the public, and it comes out later. There's a study done on what was the outcome of the war, what really happened, and it found out that a lot of the banks made lots of money off of this war, and also a lot of the war industries. So the American public was kind of upset about this. This wasn't really a war to save democracy. It wasn't a war to end all wars. All right. Now, moving into the conflict itself. Japan, if you know anything about them, they step up their industrial capacity tremendously in the 20th century, and they're able to invade China in early 1937. This takes place, and there's all kinds of horror stories about this and what's going on, but that is the Pacific theater. That is the Pacific world, and they go on basically a conquering of as much of Asia as they possibly can. The United States sees this as an issue, and eventually our relationship with Japan does get tense, and as you know, it leads into Pearl Harbor. And if you want to look at a date for when the war starts in the European theater, really it's seen kind of technically as September 1st, 1939, with the Germans invading Poland. All right, the United States stays out of this because of our isolationist stance. However, President FDR, for a long time, for several years, he slowly walks the American public towards war and understands that this is a conflict that we're going to have to be involved in. Today, your task is to look at the Four Freedom Speech. Okay, the Four Freedom Speech, a very famous speech by FDR, given in early 41, months before Pearl Harbor, but he outlines what is this ideological battle really about? What are we standing for? What are we standing up for? And why are we the arsenal of democracy? A phrase he uses in 1940, remember, when we're lending supplies to the British. All right, but remember, democracy was not a popular thing. Only 11 governments at the time had some form of democratic features or democracy. All right. Today, we've lived through a revolution of democracy post-World War II. All right. Over 100 nations have some form of democracy. All right. So that could be an outcome of World War II, is that there's this democratic movement, but that's another bigger discussion. Anyways, moving to some of the film stuff. If you have a chance, I posted the Ken Burns link, all right, about how many people served and things like that. This is a huge war. Please take a look at this film. If you have time, take a look at more of his film, okay? Anyways, moving on to basically World War II and how the United States turns the tide. All right, and if we get into things basically conflict-wise, the United States not really physically pulled into the conflict, getting our troops involved, until December 7th, 1941, with the attack on Pearl Harbor, which is an outpost in Hawaii. It's one of our military bases there. Okay, most of you know about this. December 7th, 1941, FDR says, a date that will live in infamy. Okay, this brings us into conflict. All right. Now, prior to that, let's just kind of go over a couple things of what's taking place with our relationship with the UK. Right after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Churchill does come to the White House and stays for several weeks. They drink quite a bit, but they have big discussions about what is this war about and what does it mean. Actually, they became so chummy that in the middle of the night, FDR ran to Churchill's room, opened the door. Churchill was in the middle of a bath. Actually, he was wiping himself down. He was nude. And Churchill said, "The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has nothing to hide from the President of the United States." And FDR was excited to talk about this idea of the United Nations. We need to revamp this League of Nations. It will be called the United Nations. And also in these meetings of a couple weeks, they decided to go after Hitler first. We'll take out Hitler, then we'll turn to what's going on in Asia. And what starts to step up here is the Battle of the Atlantic. The Germans are taking over the Atlantic. They are sinking ships left and right. 87 ships in the first 4 months of our conflict of helping lend these supplies and bring supplies and men over to the UK. The next 7 months, over 681 ships are taken down. But the United States industrial capacity, and this is what a lot of people claim, if you look at the numbers, this is what brought us out of the Depression. We're building 140 ships a month. All right, now let's get a lay of the land here. Here's Europe. All right, the Allies. This is controlled by Axis, and these are neutral countries. All right, just to get an idea, the Nazis controlled most of Western Europe. All right, it is amazing what they were able to do in that short amount of time. All right, just to kind of give you an idea of where we're at. This is all Nazi control.
My friends join your lobby for squads. I'm alright, Racine. If you win, you corrupted Voyager. That'd be crazy.
Somebody got into my screen for some reason. I don't know how. All right, now let's go to North Africa. Operation Torch. That's what we're looking at. The Axis powers, they controlled most of North Africa. And this is where Eisenhower, here's Eisenhower here, here's Rommel down here. Eisenhower says, we're going to land in North Africa and we're going to push them back. We're going to push, and with our allied troops, and mostly this is a tank battle, we're going to push them back, and we're going to go all the way to North Africa and get to the Mediterranean. And we're going to beat and defeat Rommel and push them back into Italy eventually. All right, who's going to lead this? General George Patton. If you have time, check out this film. It's an interesting film, an interesting character study. This guy's got all kinds of crazy stories. He believes he's historically reincarnated. He believes he lived during Roman times. Okay, well, I could go on and on and on. But anyways, this brings us to the Italian campaign. All right, so it takes a bit of time. Right? And actually, this goes on until 45. But the Allies start pushing, and they get on to Sicily in 43. And they keep pushing north. And at some point, Mussolini is stripped of his power. He's eventually assassinated by a firing squad in northern Italy. And then his body's put out in public, hung upside down. People stone him and things like that once he's passed, obviously. But Italy is held on to, northern Italy is held on to by Hitler's forces for a long time. And it wasn't until 45... down here, 45, that Italy was secured by the Allies. But that's one sweep of Allied forces. They're trying to come up, down from the south. Okay? Now, the most famous thing that most of you know of is, what we're going to look at here, is D-Day. The D-Day and landing at Normandy, okay? Which is June 6, 1944. This is the largest land, sea, air operation in military history. All right, now the Germans had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles secured along that coast. They weren't sure exactly where we were going to land. All right, it's even said, and this came out in the late 1990s, that Patton had an inflatable army in England that he was in charge of. He wanted to lead the invasion. He did not get to lead the invasion. All right, but over a 1 month period, we land 1 million troops, 567,000 tons of supplies, and 170,000 vehicles. And with, here you see right here, this is where we're coming from, southern England. All of these supplies and men are coming in. All right. And you get a little better idea there, the lay of the land, if you're into that military history. All right, for our purposes. So what's taking place is we're going to push. We're going to push, liberate Paris, liberate other parts of France, liberate Belgium, Netherlands, get into Germany, and it's a race to Berlin. The same thing for the Soviets. They're going to push through Poland. It's a race to Berlin. The Soviets do get to Berlin first. This is a traditional type of warfare where you capture the capital and then you are winning the war. All right. Here's some images from, I think you saw this one earlier. This is Omaha Beach, landing at Normandy. If you have time, check out some of the more popular films. Of course, Saving Private Ryan, a lot of you might know of. But a really good one that looks at a company during World War II, and they interview a lot of the soldiers. Each episode, it's called Band of Brothers. Highly recommend it, and you'll get pretty interesting history on what took place there. All right. Now, the next major battle that we're going to look at here is October 44. All right. October 44, the Americans capture their first town, Aachen, right here. All right. Right on the border of Belgium. And this is called the Battle of the Bulge. Why? Hitler's got a huge bulge of military right here And this is the last line of defense. This is the last-ditch effort. They lose over 120,000 troops, 600 tanks, 1,600 planes. And from that point, the Nazis can do little but retreat. And it's a race to the capital. Well, this starts in October. So this goes throughout the winter. And the Americans actually do not get to the capital until early May. All right. But on the way, what they start to do is they start to liberate some of the death camps. All right. As they move westward, should be eastward into Germany, and the Soviets moved westward, they start to come across these death camps. All right, we all know about this. You've studied this a bit. You've read Mouse. All right, if you have time, I did put a trailer for the film The Last Days. It looks at some of these camps. All right. The Americans, they liberated some within Germany. The Soviets went through a lot of those in Poland. Some of you might be familiar with Auschwitz and things like that. The Americans, they liberated Dachau, which was the model camp just outside of Munich. You could go there today. There's a big memorial. All right, it's a tough place and site to visit, but it's something to consider. All right, and something to really be mindful of in terms of what was this war about? What are we fighting for? All right. If any of you know anything about African Americans who served in the war, there's a thing that they talked about, double victory. We need to win double victory here. We need to get victory abroad in Europe for those who are being discriminated against, and to get rid of fascism and have a more democratic thing. But also double V, victory in the United States. We need victory for African Americans in the United States. Okay. Now, VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, accepted unconditional surrender from the Third Reich. Unconditional, we'll talk about that. This is what we wanted from the Japanese. We do not want a regime or power like this to reemerge. There will be no conditions. You surrender and we will tell you what is going to happen. All right? We celebrate May 8th. This is a big day. And the war in Europe's over, but now the Americans turn towards the Pacific along with the Russians. All right, and we turn our attention there. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please put it in the comment section, and we will try to talk more about this. This is a fascinating time period, what's taking place and what humanity went through, and I hope we can respect that and hopefully get into some of these activities and lessons. All right, I hope all the Titans are doing well. It's great to communicate with you guys online. Take care. Don't forget to keep it safe, sane, and legal. I wish you all the best.